We go live. Live. Well, really happy today because it's a privilege for me. Could you two move forward a little bit? Really, like just you don't have to go closer. Just come more into the frame. Because
I didn't do my hair.
Oh no.
Put your dark glasses on like so. Because it's not very often that in this kind of context you get to talk with two Indigenous curators. So this is France Trepanier, my friend and colleague, and who happens to also be my partner in life, who's a curator and also an artist. And Teresa Vandermeer Chassé, am I pronouncing it
That's
correctly?
right, yeah. You did it.
Who is also a curator, Indigenous curator from the Yukon. Do you have an artistic practice as well?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, I don't know. Why don't you tell me about that?
It started with beading
Okay.
when I was young, and then I started to kind of make things that were like a little bit bigger. And then when I did my master's at Concordia, I went to installations.
Wow.
So that's my.
Are you beading
practice.
things or just shapes, or like are you being like, this is a moccasin, this is a...
No, I don't do mocks. I did one pair of mocks. That's it.
Okay.
So, like when I was starting to learn how to bead, and I was starting to kind of think about selling work, I asked my grandma what I can sell, what I can't sell,
Okay.
and she said things that are made for potlatch, so things like moccasins or any kind of cultural elements. She was like, no, don't sell that. That's just for us. So I don't do any of the traditional kinds of beading or anything.
So what
like
do you sell? Or do you even sell?
I don't know, just different stuff.
Little things.
My biggest installation is a wall tent that I sewed back together and then kind of had to make new pieces and things like that. And then there's sewing, embroidery, beadwork in it.
Wow.
And then I have pieces that are like this work called Warm Shower Among Us, which is a hanging piece. And it has like charcoal from a forest fire from the Yukon around where I'm from. My grandma's cigarette butts and yarn and all that kind of stuff.
All
So,
right. It's quite the installation.
yeah, I like going big now.
All right. What did you curate yourself upstairs?
I feel that's not appropriate. Somebody else has to.
Have you ever curated yourself?
Well, I've been trying to, for a long time, blur the lines between curation and artistic practice. Like who's the curator and who's not the curator, and who's the artist, and how do artists get involved in curation in a way. And it started for me because I went to an artist trend center in Quebec, in Gaspésie, and I was told that no Indigenous artist would present work in that gallery. They invited me to go there to curate, but then they told me that, because there were no professional artists
They weren't good enough.
in the Mi'kmaq communities.
That's what they were saying.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they told me that. And it really shifted something. Like, I'm really hard-headed person, so I took it as a challenge, and so I was able to create work, but in a way it was like a way of just setting the space, like creating a space for artists to be able to be present their work inside it. And this is where the longhouse piece came from, Offerings of Hong. And the longhouse was created with Mr. Martin from Listgouge, and then artists from those both communities were invited to be part of that and to have a strong presence in the gallery. So
And you curated the artist
I
as
was,
well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah, I
the same
remember
thing.
Nadia,
And then
did.
that piece traveled, and every time it traveled, there's different artists that were part of it, and it was presented here at one point.
Briefly tell the story of Mr. Mark, because it's a lovely story. Of when you went to
See, that's not fair because he knows all my
No,
Yeah,
but
stories,
it's a
right?
lovely story. Just tell the brief version of it.
Well, I'm not too in an album, and I saw this longhouse, and I said, "Oh, who built that?" He said, "Oh, I build longhouses," and it had been one of my crazy dreams for a long time to be able to build one as a architectural structure for a gallery context. And so he accepted to work with me. So he took me. We went up the mountain, and he showed me how to listen and to hear which tree was willing to become a longhouse, a pole for the longhouse. So we worked together for a period of time, and then we created that thing. And every time we'd go out to harvest the poles, he wanted to harvest bark, because that's what you put on the longhouse. But I was trying to explain to him that I wanted just to have a screen, because I was so gentle. So he would say, "Oh, okay." But then, like 15 minutes later, he said, "That's
bark.
a good piece of bark that could be." And finally, we brought everything in the gallery. We set it up, and then I put the cloth on top, and then the projection, and then it was like, okay.
So just briefly to say that people who've been listening, that the sorting project is about sorting through my stuff, because I'm getting old and I'm thinking about archive and all that stuff. But I think sorting, and I've found this out during the residency, because many people have come to visit, pertains to people's lives. In their daily lives, they're sorting their things, they're sorting their papers, they're sorting their ideas, they're sorting their friends, they're sorting even their emotions. But I want today, especially with these two distinguished curators and artists here, to talk a little bit how sorting works in the context of curation. Because even when you're trying to change the meaning of curation, you're still making decisions. You're still sorting and saying, well, this person's in and this person's out. So talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about how curation is a form of sorting and a form of discriminating, and I don't mean that in a like discrimination, the way we use the word, but selecting maybe is a better word. This is in, this is out. So how do you feel about that?
You want me to go first?
No, you. She already told her story. Plus, you don't have the whole time. So.
Yeah, that's true.
Plus, I always talk to you.
It is kind of tricky, because that is part of that's part of the role. Part of it is deciding everything from who's like in the show to what work is in the show. All of these different types of things are part of it, and then also like space, like physical space of like what's going here, and sometimes you might have to even cut things out if it
By
feels
physical
too,
space, you mean how much space you're going to allocate to?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and you might have to cut things out if it feels too packed,
Right.
so kind of depends, but there's a lot of factors to it. Like one is financial, if you're paying and able to pay Carfax fees, or if you have a grant or anything like that, you might have a limited number of artists already, so that is already a determining factor into
Carfax is the Canadian Artists Representation, kind of like a union for artists.
Yeah, like how you can actually, how many people can you put in it? Is it going to be 20 or is it going to be 5? Usually it's 5, so something like that. And then selection of work and people depends on, I think, the curator and where they're working and how they're curating. Like, do they have a space? Are they going to be a guest curator? All this kind of stuff. And then it's about figuring out, is it based on the relationships that the curator has already made with artists, or is it based on the curator wants to make relationships with artists? So their whole intention is to go and meet new artists that they've never heard about before. Or is it related to a theme? Oh, these artists work in this media, and we want them to focus on this. So, there's a lot of decisions in it.
Historically, in the Western tradition, the idea of curation has been you're choosing excellence and you're choosing the best. These words that don't really make sense, never made sense to me, but don't really make sense in Indigenous context. And yet, and I'm really interested in the contradiction in this, and I'd love to hear you talk about it. Yet there is a certain kind of, any numbers of people you could pick out. So does excellence, I always think of excellence as being culture specific. There's no universal kind of excellence. But is it possible to talk about excellence in an indigenous context, in contemporary indigenous art?
I'm interested in curating very often, so I do tend to focus on artists that I like my emerging artists. I always like trying to support them, getting them into spaces. I like artists that are trying to figure something out, exhibition or even work. So I kind of like being a part of it, maybe, instead of like kind of flipping through a catalog almost and saying, I want that piece, that piece, that piece.
Relationality.
And collections, they're kind of tricky too. Like if you're picking from collections, those relationship with artists directly, I find collection curation is very difficult. With that community-based idea of like, what are we used to? And we're used to working with community and trying to build something together. So that's kind of the work that I tend to focus on more so than the other kind of stuff.
Do you think curation itself, and I'm deliberately asking it because I don't know, comes from a Eurocentric tradition? Like if indigenous people were never influenced by colonialism, yeah, right. That's so easy to imagine. But I mean, how do you think art, in quotations, would be presented? If we, in other words, if we didn't have white wall galleries,
well, yeah,
and, you know,
I think the gallery is the thing that comes from,
yes,
and that's the thing that
yeah.
we're filling a space. So it is different. Like, I kind of like talk about it like when I'm talking about my community of Beaver Creek. I'm like, they're like almost everyone is an artist, whether they say that they're an artist or not. And for them, when I say artist, they think of selling work. Well, I don't sell my work. That doesn't mean anything. And you don't need to sell your work to be an artist. So this tiny community of like 80 people is almost fully of artists.
All making something.
Everybody's making something. And the location too, it's right on the border of Yukon and Alaska.
Okay.
And we're about 4.5 hours from Whitehorse by road. So you can't like get there any other way. So like with that, you know, what are you gonna do? You're gonna make art. You're bored, you know? So that's part of it, is like that's kind of the world that they live in. And when I think of like traditional art, a lot of people kind of end up going to like moccasins or like that kind of material culture. Like I think of my great grandpa, his name was Little John or White River Johnny. And he carved spoons, and they were functional because he could use the spoon, but he also sold the spoon, gave it away and whatever, and he made it from burls from trees and things like that, or sheep horn. Like, so for me, that's art. And we've been like slowly kind of collecting that work back and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. I think like we always had an art practice, whether we had colonization or first contact or not.
But what would that look like without
curation,
colonization? Maybe it's impossible to imagine.
Yeah, I mean, like we'd still be doing the same stuff that we were doing, right? We'd just be adapting to the world that we would live in if there was no colonization. Right. So who knows what we could have accomplished or been, right? So we do have to live with that now. But like curation, I think we already kind of maybe were doing it in some ways, you know.
Let's just briefly talk about that.
Because, well, if you look at like archaeological sites, so
6th century curation of it.
So my great grandpa, Little John, his camp is called Little John Camp, and it's also Little John site, which is an archaeological site that dates 14,000 years. Wow. And a lot of the things that are there is just leftovers. It's the things that were like garbage at that time. And so they found like arrowheads or like pieces of things, and that's telling you that somebody discarded it. If it was and what we categorize as something that's like we put in a museum, they were throwing it on the ground saying it's no use anymore. So yeah,
that's brilliant. That's a real insight for me to understand that. Yeah. What, first of all, I mean, it's kind of like good examples of talking to us about that. I'm just trying to get the live stream up now. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think the other aspect of that question is also, well,
Go ahead.
no, you're pulling.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Pulling on.
Okay, sorry. It's all part of it.
It's all part of it. The mentorship protocols that existed before art schools, and how there were protocols built in about the quality of the work, about like a mentor would not let a mentee's work out in the world until it reached a certain level of skill, a certain level of I don't want to use excellence because I don't think it's a relevant word, but of cultural and artistic relevance and integrity. So there was sorting being done in a way, that some stuff would not just, because it was a reflection on them as the mentor to make sure that the work was at a certain level. So I think that was part of that curatorial, which was not really curatorial. I think the other big element in this question is, and you touched upon it, is the fact that art was not conceived as something outside of life. It was not a static thing that you put on a pedestal and you look at. It was really part of life. It was everything. It was your house. It was the clothing. It was your shoes. It was the jewelry. It was everything. And so I think this is where the big misunderstanding happened when the newcomers came here and saw the work and not understanding those practices and in a way, declassified them or put them in a different category that was not art. It was either an artifact because they were starting their museums.
The arrowheads.
Yeah.
They needed to put stuff in those museums, or
Folk art.
or with folk, or it was like,
Or primitive art. All these names that push it
it
out.
was just like, and then, I've also, there's tension in this idea of the curation, about being a curator. Because it comes from that tradition. It comes from the tradition of museums, of the idea of collection, the idea, because curator was, initially people that took care of the collection. And so the very idea of collecting is interesting. Like, what are we doing, right? Because that's something else that you referred to, the fact that objects, they have a lifetime, they have a life cycle. And the idea of wanting to preserve stuff at any cost was a foreign idea, really. I think what was more important in Indigenous communities was to make sure that the knowledge and the skills were being transferred. So if you need a new drum, you don't need to save the one from 5 generations ago.
That doesn't work all that well anymore.
You have the knowledge of how to make a drum, or to make a mask, or to make a rattle, or to whatever you needed. So I think it's a very different kind of mindset. It's a different take on the art itself, and so it's not an art of rupture. It's an art of integration. It's an art of relationality. You're not alone with the genius artist making art. You're responding to the need of a community. You're there to, that's your job. Like some people are dreamers, others are artists, and you have a job. So I think it's a really kind of fundamental epistemological almost tension there of showing Indigenous work and creating the proper context for that work to be understood, like historically, but now in the contemporary world. Understand the straddling of those two worlds, because contemporary Indigenous artists are straddling those two worlds. And I think this sometimes is not well understood or grasped or put forward.
And it's still the paradigm of the Western art tradition with the White Wall Gallery is still the thing, and we'll give you Indigenous artists access in here. we're not going to change anything. We're not even going to change our understanding of art, but you can come in and show your work.
And then the other aspect is,
That's another aspect.
well, I'm thinking about this, right? I'm curating something right now, and I'm really thinking about these questions. Is the whole relationship of power? Because those titles and those positions initially, I mean,
The
the whole
indigenous
idea.
titles, you mean?
No, but like
Curator.
curator,
Okay.
museum,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
it's establishing relationships of power, and it's establishing authority, and who's going to tell the truth, right? I remember when I was teaching at Camosun in Indigenous Art Studies. One of the first tasks I would give the students was I would take them to the Royal BC Museum when they had their old exhibition.
The Curtis photograph.
And I would say, find 10 lies in this exhibit. Because I think, anyway, you get the point, right? And so I think Indigenous curation has this kind of tricky place to sit in between different chairs, or I don't know how to put it, but you know, like there's a lot of tension in that. And I think, especially with young artists that are sometimes completely swept away in institutions because the way that we teach art now is very institutionalized, and so much pressure is put on them. They're not cared for. That's the problem of art of rupture, right? When you're in a system where art is in a ruptured condition all the time, and the competition and having to perform, you're not in relationality, and so you're not taken care. You know, I often say like being a curator is about caring for the space.
Same root word.
And it's all about sorting in a way. It's like sorting the space. It's sorting ideas. Which ideas are you gonna kind of try to work around? Sorting work, sorting people, but also sorting audiences and caring for those audiences. Like, who are you talking to? And why do you want to do this? What is it like? And I think that we are. I'm gonna sound like an old complainer.
But you are an old
Yeah. It seems to me that often those questions are evaded or, you know, it's just skipped altogether. And it's just like you're producing exhibitions.
Actually, thank you, because you led me directly to my question for Teresa, which is, as a curator, how do you negotiate that? No, but it's tricky, right? I mean, you're in a white wall space, and the artist front center, regardless of how alternative it is, it's still firmly in the tradition of the, you know, it's the avant-garde of the, you know, that kind of theoretical. So, if you're showing, since you're showing many Indigenous artists, are you okay with showing customary practices just as they are, and not say, oh, what do we have to make it contemporary?
No.
Okay.
For me, the same thing. Curating is like, it goes back to care, and it's about like when I'm trying to tell people or teach people how to curate. I'm always like, it's, you know, you'll see an artist come in and they'll carry their piece, and it's just like wrapped in a towel or not even, and they just kind of throw it there on the floor or something, and then you're like, whoa, gloves. You know, you kind of like, you show a level
reverence.
of care that not necessarily the artist does, you know, like, and I do that with my work. I throw it everywhere, and then once it's in a gallery, there's almost an expectation that there's care and due diligence there with it. And also with the artist, because you want the artist to be comfortable. And I do say that the curator is like a translator. You have to explain through how you set up a show, how you talk about the artist, how you represent the artist and their work is very essential to your audience understanding and the point of that artist. Because if you don't get the artist and you don't get the work, your translation's going to be off, and audiences are going to be confused.
The show upstairs is a good example.
And everything is going to not make sense, right? So that's a big part of it, is the curator needs to have that level of care of the work, They need to understand materials aspect of it. They need to know the history, the stories of the artist. They need to get to know the artist. That's good to know. All of those kind of things are important to actually like doing good work, I think. Because if it's not there, then you can kind of read it in a space a little bit when, you know, a curator's just kind of stamping their name on the wall, but you're like, what did you actually do? Like, I don't
Did you
feel
even
like...
meet the artist?
You know,
Did
do you know
ever
this
meet
person?
Yeah.
Sometimes you can kind of read it, I think. But yeah, that's a big part of it. I think negotiating in a space, I was like, so I didn't go into curation, like I was never trained in curation.
Okay.
So I was...
You're trained in art though?
I was, well, only in the masters.
Okay.
So it was my grandma.
Only in the masters.
Well, that's because I got there doing self, all by myself with my family. So it was my grandma that taught me and went straight into visual arts. And then it was just kind of like looking at what she was doing. Nowhere.
Oh.
Home.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
I didn't study until my master's in fine arts.
Oh.
And that was mostly to just because it was COVID and I lost all my contracts. So I decided to go back to school.
Okay. Where?
Concordia.
Concordia.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, for that whole time I was a visual artist, and then I got a job as an assistant curator at the Yukon Art Center.
Okay.
And that's when curation came into play for me.
Okay.
Of like, what does this mean? And I always liked, I was more into music, and so I was thinking about like being behind the stage. Always, I was never wanting to be a musician. I always wanted to be the person behind the stage supporting the artist. And then I translated that into visual arts.
Yeah.
So then it was like, okay, what does that look like in visual arts? Oh, a curator is that role of like the person behind everything that kind of helps support this project move forward. And I liked that you pointed out like curating of audiences, because that's the other part is not every show needs to be accessible to every single audience. It doesn't need to
Actually,
be.
you could say, Teresa, that it never can be. You could even say
it
that.
honestly can't be. Yeah, that's true. So it's kind of like you have to like understand, you know, who might be coming, who do you want to come through the door, and how do you get them there? That's it. That's all you have to do. It's not I want to represent every artist, I want to represent every audience. You cannot do it.
with universal art that everyone can relate to.
Yeah, you can't. Exactly. So you have to like pick. You have to pick like what is important. What's important of the space? What is it missed? What are the gaps in it? And try to fill those gaps is always kind of a nice way to maybe negotiate what the history of a particular space is, and then kind of go from there. Yeah.
I know you have to go. Is it a Zoom meeting or an in-person meeting?
Yeah.
So I'll just ask you one more question, and then we can riff on the same question. Then you can have half an hour to talk
there
non-stop. Given everything you both said, he's pointing to your time. You need to go right now this second.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
They can leave.
The hell with it.
He's gonna see this later. Sorry.
There's some good. Oh no! Time! It's time. Given what you've both said, and you've done together an excellent job of talking about Indigenous curation, but what would you like to see? How would you like it to be? And obviously there's the obvious answers, well, more resources and you know, more chances for artists and curators curating, you know, those are the obvious ones. But maybe I'm asking more from the point of view of a community, from the point of view of like, how do you, as a curator, with more resources, nourish communities in their artistic practice?
That's a good question.
It's your going away book.
Yeah, it is like it is something that we're trying at Open Space. We are trying to work with an artist or a group of artists or a duo or something like that, and looking at the specific audiences and communities that they're a part of, and then not only supporting the artist but supporting the community that comes with them.
Whoa, Teresa, what does that mean? Supporting the community.
The ways that we can do it, and I have to think of Like, I mean, our door's always open.
Yeah.
Anyone can come in if they need support. We're right here. But a lot of people don't know that, and they're kind of always thinking it has to be associated with a program.
Mm.
So not everything is associated with public. No, we don't need to have it. Has helped kind of some community Indigenous people
You
that are
only
in the
want
north
it in the Zoom
have
call.
a space, a physical
Right,
space.
right.
A lot of places don't. A lot of collectives don't. So that is the main thing: is who can we get you in? That's the biggest.
And broaden not just the audience, but the means to bring them in.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we're having a feast. We're having
Yeah,
an Indigenous
yeah.
protocol conversation.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
it's not just about art.
No,
what
it
the
doesn't
art is.
have to be. And that's what I like about what we've kind of developed here at Open Space, and I think all throughout the years of its legacy of trying to do things like that. Of it doesn't have to just be art. It doesn't have to just be visual art either. All of that kind of stuff. It's supporting an artist in, do they need to consult community? We have a space. And then it leads to maybe a project eventually that they do.
For just the artist. I'm working for the community.
Yeah.
And you would do shows at the Friendship Center. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
what were you going to say?
Well, he had taken that little office,
Oh,
and
yeah,
it was
yeah.
his office, the little place, and he had this desk, and people could just bring whatever,
Yeah.
and he would put it on the wall.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was like his own little impromptu
Little spot, yeah, yeah.
exhibition, and people, but for a lot of people, it was an important connection.
Yeah, they
like,
were-
hey,
yeah.
my piece is
My
there.
piece
Yeah,
is in
like,
that.
I'm in the
Yeah,
gallery.
yeah,
it was
Look,
like-
I'm in the gallery.
yeah.
I had to show it open space.
Yeah.
Just a small example, but yeah, I think bringing community, and actually him and Doug were also instrumental in creating the Indigenous Youth.
Oh, the
program,
HIAP program.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
That
still
was-
exists?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was amazing, you know,
Yeah.
it was like a way of bringing
Yeah.
community in and having workshops and having guests and having good food and creating that.
Yeah, it exists with Talum now.
Oh,
The
okay.
Talum Indigenous Artists Collective, yeah. I do have to run.
Yeah, no, you
Yeah.
do.
Sorry.
You do. I'm going to get in trouble if I keep you here too long.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Nice
much,
visiting
Teresa.
with
Thanks a
you,
lot
Mom.
for stopping by.
Yeah, I'll pop by after my call.
You'll take your chair with you. Each person arrives and leaves with their chair.
All right, see you.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'm going to switch over to there. I can come a little more in the frame now. So, riffing on my last question, I would ask, you know what's weird about this though? Can you come forward a bit? You were both, yeah.
If you come back and
Yeah,
look at
okay,
it,
sure.
Look.
Yeah. The problem is it's there we go. Okay, that's good. Yeah, so what is the same question I asked to Teresa, what is the kind of ideal conditions for Indigenous art practices, but in your case specifically curation to thrive? Well, what does that look like? Open space is a good example, but it's still not perfect and it's still lacking in certain ways, right?
Time.
Okay.
Time. If there was something to change,
Yeah.
would be to
You mean more time?
more time.
Yeah.
Engage in projects, engage with communities over a longer period of
Okay.
time. And
So would that look like a 5-year project? What
could be, yeah,
what do you mean by
a
that?
commitment over time.
Okay.
So, and what happens when you do that is you put the emphasis on process and on relationships. You're maintaining these relationships, you're developing protocols together, you're creating
Kind of like you did with Bradley all those years.
that, and,
Yeah.
and also with
Bradley Dick.
Vastevag in the Gaspé Peninsula.
Right.
It was a 3-year project.
Okay. Was it always intended that way?
Yeah, because I was an outsider, I was asked to curate an exhibition of Mi'kmaq artists
But you're not
or
Mi'kmaq.
Indigenous artists. I
Oh,
think it
okay.
was more broad. It was like, okay, can you just? We never, in 23 years of existence, we've never had an Indigenous
Get
First
them in here.
Nations.
Yeah.
Could you please do a show? But I think we need to engage in this project over 3 years.
With the community.
With the community, with the artists, with the community, in time. And because I think one of the challenge that has happened in a lot of Indigenous communities, and not just in the art sector, in research it happens, in health it happens, in justice it happens, It's like you've got the non-Indigenous people dropping in, doing their project, doing their research, taking information, taking data, doing interviews, recording things.
Consulting.
Well, yeah, and before that, like the the
parody.
explorers, like the whole field of anthropology, going in communities, taking and then leaving, and the community stays there. And so I think we have a lot of healing to do in that regard, to build trust with communities that have felt exploited, and felt that their knowledge was not respected, that felt that their objects were not respected.
Yeah, they don't just feel that way. It's
true.
A fact.
Yeah. So it's So for me, when it's possible to be able to conceive curatorial projects over a longer period of time, where protocols of engagement are clearly defined, where the responsibility of the host organization are clearly defined, and an understanding of resource sharing and
I'm listening.
okay.
An understanding of resource sharing.
And the protocols around handling knowledge and handling history. I mean, the whole question of Teresa was mentioning protocols in the visual arts, protocols around presenting Indigenous visual art and other disciplines as well. So that would be a big one, I think. And I think that maybe the pandemic has created a possibility for that to happen a little bit, because people were put in a position where they could not just produce and produce and produce one thing after the other. And a lot of organizations started to question that model. But it's still a powerful incentive out there. It's a whole ecology that has moved in that direction for a very long time. And how do we step out of that for a minute? And then the other big piece is connection to land.
Yeah.
How do we bring?
Neither of you had mentioned
How
that.
do we bring connection to land in that process? And it doesn't need to be just Indigenous people on the land. It's like we're all on the land. We're all on this land right now, all of us. How do we understand that? How do we relate to that?
Yeah. One thing you said that maybe a minute ago about protocols in the visual arts. I know there are people working on it. I'm not as familiar as you are. I'm thinking of the Indigenous Curatorial Collective and what's the Indigenous Imaginative in Toronto. There's people working on it, but the bottom line is, and you still see so many examples of it today, that when mainstream organizations engage with Indigenous organizations or even just Indigenous artists to include them, to give them access, to use that kind of language deliberately, do you really think they understand? I mean, I see lots. Just the other day, we were talking with someone who was being, somebody with great reputation and great respect of other Indigenous people, and that person was not being treated properly by, I won't name the institution, but by a large Canadian institution, not the Canada Council. So is it actually happening, or is it just like, well, these are the protocols and this is what should be followed now, you can follow or not?
Well, it's not a binary answer to that complex question. There's a wide range of responses. I think that following the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the call to action, I think that a lot of organizations, institutions have taken their responsibility more seriously. But I think it's a long road. Yeah. I mean, we
took 500 years.
often say it took a long time to build this, so it's going to take a minute to
People are impatient.
transform it. And I
Young,
think,
young Indigenous artists are impatient.
but it's through engagement that we can do that.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's through dialogue, it's through relationship building that we can push that conversation forward. And it's moving faster in some sectors and then less quickly in others. There's pockets of resistance.
Pockets? Those are deep pockets. I'd say there's more than pockets, really. And then I don't want to paint the Canadian art system as as monolithic. There have been some dramatic changes over the last 50 years, and there probably are examples of times when protocols were followed, where respect was shown, and there's a real collaboration and an understanding, or at least the beginnings of an understanding of, okay, we're going to work with this Indigenous community, this Indigenous nation, these Indigenous artists, and we're going to listen to how they want to do things. And we're going to try to do it that way. That's possible too, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I think that large institutions, some large institutions.
Can you think of an example where that has more?
Well, the
or less-
National Gallery, I think, is really trying to do that. Not that it's an easy task, because those,
Those brave Indigenous curators.
No, but I'm thinking like the colonial project is built in the
That's it,
DNA
yeah,
of that
yeah,
institution, right? It came out of that.
Yeah.
So how do you transform that? But I think that by putting resources and bringing real bodies in the institution,
Now there's 10 Indigenous people.
and creating
Yeah.
that group that can do this work, and that again, it's in time, right? This is it's a durational project.
You don't hire 10 Indigenous people and it changes overnight.
Yeah, and it's not a consultant that comes in
Yeah.
twice a month to
And writes a report.
no, it doesn't work like that. And so, yeah, I think there are institutions that are really trying. I think there's teaching institutions, like Okadu would be a good example of really trying to shift the way that things are done.
They're cluster hires, you mean?
Well, yeah, but the program design as well, and the understanding of what art is, because this is where it starts. Actually,
Yeah,
that's the
I
heart of the
agree.
matter,
I
right?
agree.
It's like,
Yeah.
what is art?
Yeah.
What are you talking
But
about?
once you start thinking about it and imagining it and theorizing it and doing it in an Indigenous way, or respecting Indigenous protocols and traditions and history, it completely bamboozles your Western idea of art, what you called before the art on a pedestal. It's like everything changes.
That's right.
Yeah. No, but that's, I'm not defending Eurocentricity, but if you've come to your practice, especially if you're an older person, let's say middle-aged person, you've been trained in the arts, you're an artist or a curator, you do things according to the way things have always been done, you make assumptions about universality from a Western European kind of tradition, that's what art is, and all of a sudden somebody, Indigenous, who's been here for millennia, comes along and says, no, well, that's not how we regard it, and you shouldn't regard it that way anymore. That's like turning, it's en français, c'est bouleversé, turn
Upside down.
I don't know quite the
On its
word.
head.
I don't. Yeah, it turns everything on its head. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So. it's
What's
a-
wrong with that?
Oh, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it would be easily achieved.
yeah. Well, I wouldn't be too worried about
I'm not worried.
turning things on their.
I'm not
on
worried
its-
at
on
all.
its head.
I'm not saying we have to hold on to that, but what I'm saying is it's not a transition of like, well, you need to have a quota system and every fourth show should be. It's not something that's easily done. You're
No,
talking
it's not.
about the whole mindset, the sphere of knowledge, the understanding of not just what art is. You're right that that's a fundamental question, but how is it made? Who decides what is art? What is? I remember your Awakening Memory project of artifacts that were in museums that were brought to life by Indigenous artists going in a museum and handling and talking about them. So
It's relationship to art, but it's also relationship to knowledge in a broader
yeah,
sense.
yeah,
And I think it's going to take a while for the structure of power to shift. because I think those big, or the visual arts internationally, I think you still have the big shows, the big institutions,
the blockbusters
that are driving, no, not necessarily, I'm thinking of biennales, for example.
I see.
Venice is on right now, and it's a good example
Uh-huh.
of how authority is constructed in the very DNA of the biennale, and how some people are being pushed forward and highlighted, and others are marginalized, and so there's a whole system of authority here
Right.
that is at play, even when there's an effort to go and get curators from outside of the European continent. It's still complicated.
Yeah, I'm a little bit familiar with this year's Biennale. I didn't see I might have missed it, but I didn't see much of an indigenous presence there.
Oh, there.
There's a few, but more not from the North American countries. Who's representing Canada this year?
Abbas Atakan?
Okay.
Abbas, what's his name? Abbas. It's a beautiful piece, actually.
Yeah, so
Bonnie Devine has a beautiful
okay.
exhibition there. There's like
in Venice.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Venice is many things.
Yeah, it's not
right
just
now,
the
right?
Biennale. Yeah. Let's not get sidetracked
Yeah.
talking about Venice. So, I'm coming up to the end of the hour. I just want to give you a chance to say whatever you want without one of my questions, and without me kind of directing the conversation. Like, just say what you want about Indigenous curation. Maybe the same question that I kind of asked you. No, I'm not even going to say that. Just what is it that you feel like is burning that I haven't asked you?
Well, the things that we haven't talked about that I
Yeah.
thought we would talk about is relationship to objects.
Okay, go.
In your
Sorting,
your
yeah,
thing
yeah,
of
yeah,
sorting, and
I wanted to start that way.
not so much as an Indigenous curator, just as a human being.
Mhm.
What's our connection to objects, and what are we doing with objects, and why are we accumulating so much objects, especially in our culture right now, the overconsumption of stuff, and the kind of accumulation of not just object, in some cases of wealth, and like I don't know, like it seems to me that there's a drive for just
For greed.
yeah, and it's having a real detrimental impact on the planet. And so my big concern lately, for many decades now, is like, what are we doing? And it stems from the everyday decisions that we made, right? Are we gonna keep these things? Are we gonna and if so, where are we putting them?
Oh, and by the way, we need to go shopping to get more things.
Yeah, and we need to buy more, shelves to be able to put the stuff in, and you need to have a storage space to put the stuff in, and so what are we doing with all this stuff? And that's on an individual scale. On a larger scale, is like, what are museum doing with all this stuff? There's like vaults full of stuff.
What are museums doing anyway?
What's that thing inside of us that it wants that desire to preserve? What are we preserving with those objects? What are we trying to preserve? I think it's a question for you.
Yeah, it's a question.
What are you
for me.
trying to do? What are you trying to preserve? What's the attachment to objects,
Yeah.
and why? Why are those objects?
I was hoping that to answer your question, residency would provide me with some answers to that. I feel like I don't yet have the answers, but I have clues, and it'll take a little bit of reflection. I had an interesting conversation with a woman named Kim. I don't know her other name. She's newly hired here at Open Space, and she's an archivist, and she's studying archives, and she's very knowledgeable and articulate, and she talked about how the whole history of archives, and she named the person who invented it and all, she knows all this stuff, this history, that it was based upon the premise that an archive was somehow something true and honest and real, and therefore archives are important because they collect neutral knowledge about things. She doesn't believe that, and she understands that it's not, and challenges her professors whenever they say it. But it's part of that same thing that you're talking about, which is not just the capitalist drive, but the cabinet de curiosity, the idea of collecting to begin with. Like what you just asked it, why do we have to collect things? What do we really need to live? Why do we have to keep all our books and all our,
Thomas Piketty's new book is all about that.
Who's Thomas Piketty?
He's
The guy who wrote Capital or Capitalism or something.
yeah, he's a French economist
Right.
and philosopher,
Right.
and he just published a book about
Is that better?
how we can save the planet. I can't remember exactly,
Okay,
but
but
it's
it's a new
just published.
Okay.
About if we all collectively reduce our consumption,
Yeah.
we can stop working so hard.
Yeah.
Why are we working
Yeah.
so hard? What are we doing?
Growth. Growth.
Right? And the redistribution of resources, we can bring the whole thing down. And when do we need to be happy?
Mm-hmm.
How many boxes of papers do you need to be happy? How many?
146. I've got it right down to 140. I used to think it was 163, but it's 146.
All right. That was useful.
No, but those questions, as relevant as they are, I'm not in any way suggesting that they're neither saying to Thomas or to you, but they're age old. I mean, people have been asking them for centuries. What makes a happy life? What makes a good life? To me, it's obvious that it's not objects. But to most people in a capitalist society, it is objects. Objects give them pleasure. Purchases, commodities give them pleasure, gives them status. Actually, it gives meaning to their lives. And I'm not agreeing necessarily with that, but I'm just observing from the, not the critical lens, but the anthropological lens. Look at people that are shopping or people that shop online.
There's a new expression, it's called doom shopping.
Yeah, doom shopping, I've heard that.
That's sad.
It is sad. It is sad.
Okay, let's not end on this
No, let's not.
sad note.
Well, let's take it to the what you were talking about Piketty. If people were to reduce their consumption, but part of the problem is capitalism. Just yesterday, people were criticizing Carney because he's trying to grow the Canadian economy, but he's not growing it fast enough. And the peaks are not fast enough, and we need to grow it more, because with growth we'll provide more jobs and more production, and therefore more production of goods, therefore more consumption. This is like built into the GDP, it's built into the logic of everyday life. It's really hard to think about. It's great for Piketty to suggest that. He's a philosopher, he's got lots of money, he sits somewhere in France thinking about these things. But is it realistic to imagine that we're going to...
I think
There was a movement a few years ago, it might even still exist, called voluntary simplicity. And it was exactly that. Living closer to the land, living with less things, living with less consumption, being careful of your water use and all of that.
I think that a lot of young people are embracing those.
Some young people.
Embracing
You really think
those
it's a lot?
Some.
Okay.
And I
Yeah.
think there are countries where wealth inequality has been addressed and where people feel happy. It's not for no reason that Norway and Finland and
Sweden.
some of those northern countries are on top of the list of people, the most happy countries.
And they're still capitalist countries, and there's still wealth inequality, but it's not as great. It's not as great, and the poorest people still have a somewhat decent of a life, because they're subsidized by the system.
And Canada's 19 on this list.
And sinking. Before we go today, I found something. Oh, where is it going now? Here it is. I have no idea what it was part of, but I wanted to read it not so much just because I wrote it, but because of when I wrote it and where we are in the world today. So before I do that, I want to thank you, Franz,
You're welcome.
for coming by. And maybe you could take your glasses off just for 30 seconds so people can actually see what you look like. There you go. Say hi.
Hi.
Say bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you for coming by today.
Mhm.
So I honestly don't know if this was from a performance or a presentation or what it was. I just found it as a fragment in a binder with a report on cultural diversity. It's short and sweet, and it says, "What is peace? It is the absence of war, the absence of terror. It is the space between breaths where we know that everything's going to be okay. It's having access to an imagination that can envision that moment, that can literally create it, so that we can take another breath." Virginia Woolf once said, "You won't find peace by avoiding life." My emotions are at the surface, fresh on my tongue. I taste the bitterness in my mouth. We will not find our own peace while this war goes on. The first war in history to be so opposed by so many people of this planet. The first war where we cannot stomach it. We cannot somehow let it continue. My son's black eyes look up at me. No peace comes from violence. Peace comes from making peace, from finding solutions to conflict without violence. How dare you call me naive for feeling these feelings? It's actually you who are naive to think that this burning flesh, this bullet in a child's silent head, this horror of her mother's scream will solve anything. Don't tell me that I'm not man enough to face this war, because if this is what it means to be a man, I would rather be a human than a man. I want this next word to contain every rant against the machine, every anger against your warm gun, every stomach turning sickly at the sight of this shock and awful death. Shock and awe, if we remember, was a phrase that the US government used when they attacked Iraq after the 9/11 fiasco. And I don't know, it's like 25 years ago, it could be read today with the exception of the shock and awe reference. It fits exactly the world we're living in. Frost said to me recently, and other people have said it too, when are we going to learn from this? In this case, it's not even learning from 100 years ago. It's learning from 20 years ago. Thank you for watching today.